BookTube, it's Kim at Middle of the Book March, and this is my Bookish week for Saturday, September 3rd. Oh, let's see. Oh, and Shorty September started on the 1st, so today's video, I've got a whole bunch of books that I read, but the majority of them are super short. Why am I doing this? They're super short and skinny. So there's no way I would have been able to read this many books on a normal week. But let me tell you about what I finished. The first book that I'm going to show you I'm not going to talk about it yet because I am going to be posting a review video next week. This was a buddy read with Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading, and this is Now in November by Josephine Johnson. I read this book already last year, I think, 2 years ago. I don't remember. This is one of my favorite books of all time now, and I don't usually dog-ear books, but that's what happened. Because I absolutely hate those little sticky tabs, because I have fairly large hands and I just am not that coordinated to put the sticky tabs. So this is my reading copy, and I dog-eared the crap out of it, and I've got pen marks and arrows, and on every page I think I may have dog-eared something. And the majority of the reason I did that for this book in particular is the writing is so beautiful and phenomenal. So that's all I'm going to say. I've read this book before. I will review it and I will post it next week, but that was one of the ones I finished. Yeah, I'm so tempted to say everything right now, but I've got a lot of other books to talk about, so I'm going to put that in its own review. I hope you watch it. I really want as many of you to watch it as possible. It's a very short book, but it's just glorious. So come back and watch that review. Please, please, please. I don't love doing reviews. They're my least favorite video to do, but I feel moved to do this one. And I think Kelly might be doing one as well. We just really enjoyed talking about this book. I really enjoyed talking to Kelly because it was because of her I discovered it. And yeah, so that's all I'm going to say about that. The next book I finished was I listened to on audio, and it was Wandering in Strange Lands, A Daughter of the Great Migration Reclaims Her Roots by Morgan Jerkins. I think that's the subtitle. I'll put a picture here with the full subtitle in it. And this was very good. I really enjoyed this book. This was Morgan Jerkins chronicling her genealogical travels. What she basically did is she left her home in New Jersey. I believe she was brought up close to Atlantic City by a single mom, and she knew who her father was. But she was brought up as a family with a single parent. And she knew that her family history included enslaved people and people that left the South during the Great Migration and settled in the North or in the West. So what she basically did is she started to gather evidence and information about her family history and her relatives. And she traveled to Georgia, Louisiana, and California, kind of tracing the paths and the trails of these relatives from her father's side and her mother's side. And it was a really interesting exploration of her family history and her genealogy and her legacy. She kind of illuminates for the reader why the Great Migration happened, what is it, and why it was important, and why it's important to many Black families across the country. I really enjoyed listening to her, and she narrates her own books. I also listened to her book, This Will Be My Undoing, last year, and I really enjoy listening to her. I didn't think it was a perfect book. There were times it did get kind of bogged down with the genealogy, and I started to lose track of who was who and whose family tree am I listening to now. So it got a little muddy in there a few times, but I really do enjoy the way she puts books together in her writing and the information. She gives so much research background that I really appreciated that. So I really liked that book. And the next one is a novel. This is Catalan Street by Magda Szabo, and this is translated from the Hungarian by Len Rix. I have been pronouncing the title of this book wrong the entire time I've showed it up until today. It's Catalan Street, and I've been calling it Catalan Street. But in the back of the book is this. It's a pronunciation guide, and I, of course, didn't look at it or didn't see it until I was just almost done with the book and flipping through, and I'm like, dang it, it's clearly Catalan, like Catherine. So, this is Catalan Street by Magda Szabo, who is the author of The Door, which I read and really enjoyed last year, I think, or the year before, whatever. But this is the story of three families who settle kind of surrounding each other. They're neighbors, and they share a back garden. They share this land with each of their three houses. And their children are young, and their four children all become very tightly wound together as playmates. And this is right before World War II. So we kind of read what these families were like when the start of the story, and how tightly knit they were, how close, what their relationships, how strong their relationships were. Some of them were Jewish, and some of them were questioned by Nazi authorities, and it was such a warm and glowing beginning to the book to read about their friendships and the interactions, not only between the children, but with the parents, with each sets of parents and grandparents and that type of thing. I really loved this book, and it starts off one way and it ends another way. Because it is set during wartime, there is some tragedy involved, there are disappearances, the families have to move. Two of the children, Irene and Balint, at one point realize that they're falling in love with each other, and they do get to a point where they're discussing their future, and then all of a sudden the war breaks out. But it's very well written. I really love the story. This is the kind of book that I kept really looking forward to picking back up again, and I really enjoyed this one. If you've read The Door, read this one. I think you'll really like it. If you haven't read either, then pick one of them up, because they're both really good. Okay, now, did I talk to you? Yes, those are the first three. I finished 6 books last week, but it was only because of Shorty September, because on Thursday, I started reading my super short books that I had picked out and put in my Shorty September TBR, and I'll put that link in the description below. So I finished 3 shorty books. Here's the first one, Holy the Firm by Annie Dillard. Annie Dillard is the Pulitzer Prize winning author of Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. Let's see. Either she had to be completely high when she was writing this book, or you have to be completely high to enjoy this book. This was a mess. And I kind of read into the book and about the book online. It's a tiny book. It's 76 pages, and it's like really spread out quite a bit. This was a dumpster fire. I couldn't believe how messy this book was. I swear, it's like I had to be super high on pot to think this was a really well-written book. The basic premise is it's set in she was writing this in 1975. It's kind of an essay or a long essay, a long article. She takes up residence on Puget Sound all by herself in a wooden room, furnished room with a cat and a spider in the bathroom. If you don't like spiders, do not read this book, because it will totally gross you out. What she says about spiders and moths and all that stuff. But one of the things she discusses in this book is the topics and the themes of God and nature. She's talking about God a lot. She's talking about God as a small g, and some of the things she's talking about is like, what? And I'm a Christian, and I have a religion degree, so I'm like, what the frig is she trying to say? What is she talking about? But Annie Dillard actually was raised in a Christian home and gave it up after a while, went back to it, and then eventually converted to Roman Catholicism. And as far as I know, she's still living, and she is a Roman Catholic believer. But this book, okay, I'm going to read you a couple of sections. I have to, because it's like, what the frig did I just read? Okay, here's a paragraph. Ready? If days are gods, then gods are dead, and artists pyrotechnic fools. Time is a hurdy-gurdy, a lampoon, and death's a bawd. We're beheaded by the nick of time. We're log rolling on a falling world, on time released from meaning and rolling loose, like one of Atalanta's golden apples, a bauble flung and forgotten, lapsed, and the gods on the lamb. What? What? And I don't usually partake of stuff that gets me high. I'm fine with it. I have great friends who love it, and, you know, more power to you. But I feel like maybe I should go find some and smoke it before I read this book, because it was just absolutely crazy. Here's another one. While she's in Puget Sound in this room, she starts to attend the only church. She can see the steeple from her room, and it's a Congregationalist church. So when she attends on a Sunday, there's only like 20 people in this church, and she volunteers to buy the communion wine so she can have regular wine instead of grape juice. Here we go. How can I buy the communion wine? Who am I to buy the communion wine? Somebody has to buy the communion wine. Having wine instead of grape juice was my idea, and of course I offered to buy it. Shouldn't I be wearing robes and especially a mask? Shouldn't I make the communion wine? Are there holy grapes? Is there holy ground? Is anything here holy? There are no holy grapes. There is no holy ground, nor is there anyone but us. I have an empty knapsack over my parka's shoulders. It is cold, and I'll want my hands in my pockets. According to the rule of Saint Benedict, I should say, our hands in our pockets. All things come of thee, O Lord, and of thine own have we given thee. There must be a rule for the purchase of communion wine. Will that be cash or charge? All I know is that when I go to the store to buy eggs or sandpaper or broccoli, wood screws, milk, I like to tease a bit, if he'll let me, with the owner's son, too, whose name happens to be Chandler, and who himself likes to play in the big bin of nails. What? Okay, whatever. And then there are other parts that I'm not going to read anymore. There are other parts that are really beautifully written. For me, that was the minority. And at first I thought, I'm not smart enough to understand what she's trying to say in this stupid little book. Honestly, I don't think it's that I'm stupid. I think this is a crazy, long essay, tiny book. Why? I don't know. I just don't know. And as I read into her as a person, I read an article that said this is her least favorite of her written works. And I'm like, I understand why. That's enough of that. So the next Shorty book I finished is The Hummingbirds Gift by Cy Montgomery. She is the author of The Soul of an Octopus and many, many, many other animal and nature books. She is kind of an animal biologist and a scientist and an animal observer. The Soul of an Octopus was lovely. I loved that book. It was beautiful. It was so well written. I highly recommend that book. This was very good. However, this is basically a glorified long essay that was a chapter in another book that they basically pulled out of a longer book about birds and created this kind of little, almost like a gifty book. But I really enjoyed reading about the hummingbirds. I just felt like I read the chapter of a long book. The best part of the book are the color pictures. I mean, they're just gorgeous. And she and a very good friend of hers, a wildlife rescuer, Brenda Sherburne LaBelle is a wildlife rescuer along with her husband Russ, and Montgomery teamed up with her to rescue and nurture 2 baby hummingbirds that were deserted in a nest. and baby hummingbirds are basically the size of a peanut. So that was fascinating to read what they had to do to keep these tiny babies alive and how they got them to adulthood to the point where they could fly the nest, literally. So it was a really lovely, sweet story, a little harrowing a few times, but it was very nice. I liked it, but it's fine as a long chapter in a book about birds. It doesn't need to be its own book. Okay, the last Shorty book I finished is The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. And I've never read this. And it's a tiny little book, 110 pages. This was very good. I really liked this, and I loved her writing. I actually have since ordered her novel Caramello. I believe that's the pronunciation. But this was so well written. She basically writes almost an autobiographical novella of her life growing up as a Hispanic girl in Chicago. And it's kind of set as vignettes, and little moments in time make up each chapter. The House on Mango Street is the first house that her family actually owns. They bought it instead of renting places to live. And in the book, she is one of 2 daughters and has 2 brothers. So she is writing about her childhood in Chicago in her Hispanic neighborhood. It was published in 1984, I think, when I graduated high school. Yeah, 1984. But it was so well written, very poetic in its language and her tone. Really interesting because it gives the reader glimpses into her Hispanic childhood and the neighborhood and the people that she observes, the friends that she has. Some families are more functional than others. Some are made up of only Spanish-speaking parents, or Spanish-speaking parent and the other parent speaks English. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics that she writes about in the book. It's very well written, poetic. There are some parts of it that are happy and joyful, and others that are terrifying and abusive, but it's a very good novella. And I'm really glad I finally read it after I don't know how many years. Okay, 1984. So 38 years, 34 years. No. 39. No. How long ago? 38 years. Okay, I graduated from high school 38 years ago. That's why I can't do math right now. Oy. Okay. That was it for the 6 books that I finished. And please stay tuned for my review of Now in November next week. Please and thank you. I'm currently reading 2 books. I am listening to I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy on audio, and I will be done with it this weekend. Wow. I was happy to find this on Scribd, so I grabbed the time to listen to it. This is the story of Jeanette McCurdy, who was a child, she's not a child anymore, but she was a child actor on the show iCarly, and she went on to star in her own spin-off, Sam and Cat, I believe the name of the show was, with Ariana Grande. And in the book, she details her relationship with her mother and her experiences being a child actor. Wow. Yeah. And she narrates her own book. The only quibble I have is she's not the best narrator of her book, but the content is fascinating. And I'm really interested to see how it ends, because she talks about the relationship, the highly dysfunctional and abusive relationship with her mother, her dysfunctional childhood career, the things that those things did to her as a young woman and as an adult. It's harrowing, and it's just so fascinating. So really looking forward to finishing that. And the other book I'm reading for my Critical Chicks book group, this is The Properties of Thirst by Marianne Wiggins. She is the author of Evidence of Things Unseen, which was a Pulitzer finalist and National Book Award finalist. That book, Evidence of Things Unseen, is one of my favorites of all time. She is such a beautiful writer, and This book, I am probably on page 40. Yeah, page 40. So, and I'm just getting into it really, but I predict it's going to be one of my favorites of the year. It's beautifully written. This is set at the right before the U.S. gets involved in World War II because of Pearl Harbor. So historical fiction. It's set in the West, and it's about water. So that's that. That's it for me for this week. I've had a lot of grandbaby time, which I love, 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 love that kid. Oh, I love that little girl. So that's it for me for today. Let me know in the comments below what you think of any of the books, if you've read any of them, if you're hoping to, and please come back next week. I really want as many people as possible to hear about Now in November. That's the only reason I'm asking. I don't make any money and I'm sponsored by nobody. So that's that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, everybody. Bye.